I love horror games. Something about the thrill of running away from a monster or the ever-encroaching void that will consume all. It's fun, it's a good time, so I thought, why not make my own? And then I got to thinking, what is the most terrifying thing a gamer can ever encounter? That's right, personal hygiene. But you see, there is a problem. Horror games are extremely subjective. What is scary to one individual is probably a relaxing day at the beach to another. Plus, it requires a certain level of immersion. Usually, this means either good graphics or good sound design. Not always, there are plenty of examples of great horror games without cutting-edge graphics, think Slender the 8 Pages or Amnesia, or hell, even DDLC. None of those games have photorealistic graphics, but they all have atmosphere. What I'm trying to say is, my horror game probably isn't very scary, but it's mine and I love it. I can't really make detailed models, and I'm about as proficient in FL Studio as a monkey with 10 broken fingers, but that's not going to stop me. So I decided to make my game 2D, and that means pixel art. I throw some cash at Steam and I'm now the proud owner of Aseprite. I like this program, it's fun and good for what it does. Right, let's get cracking on that art. Art's really hard. Like, don't let anyone tell you pixel art is easy because it's differently colored squares making up a larger picture. Those people are lying to you to hide their own frustration, or maybe they weren't loved as a child. I don't know, but what I do know is pixel art is really hard. Well, any art to be fair, but this is just my learning process. The first thing I tried to do was make a basic background. Since this is about washing your hands and hygiene, I wanted to mimic a bathroom mirror. So I made a kind of tiled brick background reminiscent of school bathrooms, a mirror, and some holders for various items. Then some lights and faucets, basically anything to show the player that it's a, well, bathroom. In the end, I think it turned out pretty good. Maybe not super clear immediately what it is, but it works. Also, perspective. What's that? Next, I knew I had to work on the star of the show, Gary. How do draw human? I wish when I was in school I had at least doodled. Curse my younger self for just being a good kid doing my homework all the time and nothing else. Well, I guess there's no time like the present. I tried at least setting some rulers so I could make Gary, a bit symmetrical, and it kinda helped. After filling him in with some colors, he started to look not so bad, but the face and arms would be the hard part. The face because of the extra detail, and the arms because they would, move. At this point, I hadn't really decided what animation Gary would have, but I knew he would need, something. Also, every artist I have ever talked to said drawing fingers is hard, so that didn't help my confidence, but oh well. I can at least cheat a tiny bit by making one arm and then just mirroring it for his other, and once that's done, it's time to give Gary his dashing good looks. You know what? Not bad. I mean, he's a bit thick, but that's okay, we love him thick. Next up is the animations, and this is easy and hard. Easy because all I decided to do was rotate the arms, and that's enough to give the illusion of an up and down movement. The hard part is how Aseprite, or any program really, handles pixels that have been rotated. It kinda doesn't. It tries its best, but because the line is no longer straight, the pixels are getting kinda jumbled. I mean, it kept the original shape, but you can see how it just screwed up the key details. So I have to manually go in and try and clean this up. Not a huge deal, but yeah, I can see why this would be annoying. At this point, I figured it was finally time to open up Unity and start throwing things into it. I made sure to separate out everything by layer so I could easily, layer it, especially because this is just going to be entirely on a UI level. Okay, maybe that's a little too thick, Gary. We gotta scale you down a bit. In this early iteration, I made a little script to put on a button, and every time you click it, it'll increase a click counter. I also made an array of sprites to hold the different animations of Gary washing his hands, and when you click it, it iterates through the sprites. Originally, I thought to just have it as an animation that plays, but this is ultimately better as down the line, items bought will let you auto-click, and in that case, I would just need to call the click function. We'll probably need to rewrite it just a tiny bit, but yay forward thinking. I then added a money number and kept it separate from the click counter just in case I needed them to be different for any reason, as well as a text box that simply tracks said number. Pretty basic so far. Alright, break time from coding, and I'm not even to the hard part yet. I wanted to add the items that you will buy. So I got to work making various bathroom things like a toothbrush, some soap, cotton swabs, a hand dryer, things everyone has in their house. You know what's kind of neat? This is pretty relaxing. I mean, I'm just drawing random shapes that vaguely look like objects, but isn't that what life is? Like, just a bunch of random shapes put together that vaguely look like things that we know what they are. What's that? Brownies? I don't know what you're talking about. With everything drawn up, I just jump back into Unity to make the actual shop, which just consists of several panels that hold an image and a button to buy the item. I also made cut versions of most of the items, that way when you buy them, they'll actually be displayed in the room. Right now, it's all pretty straightforward. Just click a button, it activates something, and takes away your money. The problems start when I need to try and make things persist and have more than a surface level interaction. The objects will need to have multiple pieces of data attached to them, a cost, an increase per level, a level, and probably more. So I thought this would be the perfect chance to use scriptable objects. But I had actually never used those before. Even now, I'm not sure if what I did was the right way, but I ended up just making 9 objects, one for each of my items, and changed the information there. The other way to do it would have been to make one abstract scriptable objects and 9 things inherit from it, but I made it work, so it's fine. This was exacerbated by the fact that I'm an idiot, so I like coding, as I've said before, but I'm not very good at it. As I mentioned, this is an entirely UI-based game, so I thought it would be easy to just have 2 scripts. A game manager that handles all the coding and calculation, and a UI manager that would handle all the UI elements, basically just pulling the information from the game manager and displaying it. That isn't a terrible idea. In fact, if you follow the encapsulation thing, it's mostly fine, until I realized how much stuff had to be shoved into the game manager file to make it work. Then I had things where, for instance, a button is UI, so it should go in the UI manager, okay, sure, but the thing the button does is 100% in the game manager, so I either need to make silly cross calls between scripts or ignore my UI rule, which I did the former. It was stupid, I should have done the latter, but what am I gonna do? Fix it? No. In the end, this is one of those cases of it being programmed rather poorly, because if anyone aside from me opened this up, they would struggle to follow along. I mean, at one point I took a month-long break and even I struggled to remember what I was doing. Anyway, self-deprecating rants aside, where was I? Oh, right, buying things. With the scriptable object holding the cost of the item, all I have to do is check if my money is higher than the cost and subtract the cost from the money and do whatever following logic. Pretty simple stuff. I decided to make it a bit easier on myself in that I would use an array of shop items, that way at any point I could simply use an index to quickly get the data that I needed. But this is where things start to spiral out of control. See, there's probably a better way to do this, but in my head I thought, well, if all 9 objects are an array from 0 to 8, then I could make an array of buttons and 0 to 8 would work there too. And that's true as long as everything is arranged the same. Shop item 3 corresponds to button 3, shop item 5 to button 5, and so on. 2 problems. 1, if any of those things are wrong, it could make debugging an absolute pain. And 2, that's a lot of random magic numbers. What does list of by buttons index 7 even mean? Well, by itself, absolutely nothing. Everyone out there that is a beginning programmer, maybe be smarter than me. I kid, but seriously, this is not the best way to go about it. I actually tried making an enum at one point, and I will later for something else, but I just couldn't get it to work, which is where the array idea came from. That being said, arrays are powerful because of being able to quickly iterate through data using loops. Case in point 1 for that, I wrote a for loop that, when activated, would iterate over the list of items, and check to see if money was greater than the amount. If so, make the buy button interactable, if not, set it as inactive. So the good news is, this takes care of the vast majority of the gameplay. The bad news is, it was all the easy stuff. The next thing I did was kind of medium difficulty, in that I wanted to make it to where when you buy an item, the game will start to auto-click for you. So I added a click rate and a bunch of variables to track if an item was purchased. In my head I thought, oh, I could just have one global timer, and as things are bought, they would work off of that timer to click themselves. I could not figure out how to do that. These simple timers, I don't know what it is, I get how they work, but every single time I always have to look it up. For a singular item like a weapon fire rate or something, it's fine, but having all these things at the same time just kinda lost me. A good buddy of mine, OpenOwl, tried to explain it to me, but I'm just running on the peanut brain energy. So I ended up making 9 different timers, and when each item is purchased, it begins running. Efficient? No. Smart? Also no. Works? Well, yes, so it's fine. I also had an idea to implement a max level for items, basically meaning you couldn't buy 11 zillion toothbrushes because why would you do that? Anyway, it should be easy. I mean, the actual implementation of it was just an integer that represents how many, but getting it to work with the logic I already had is the hard part. Big surprise, right? Specifically though, it made me finally realize that I needed to actually think about the order of things happening. For example, when exactly should the game check how much money you have? Then, when should the UI update in relation to those checks? In those cases, it's honestly pretty inconsequential. The UI should be updated right after the calculation change, but the next thing I wanted to work on was making the text box appear, and here it really matters. So, this is my thought process. When a certain action happens, probably a timer, the speech bubble will spawn. It'll show up with some kind of animation, and after it's fully loaded, the text will display and a voice line will play. Then after that's finished, erase the text and reanimate the speech bubble to disappear. I did this by daisy chaining coroutines, which basically means I said, okay, time to start the process. Do it over a couple seconds, now wait a second, now do the next thing, now wait, now do the next thing, until it was finished. My point being that the order is very specific, and if something were to happen out of turn, it would break the whole thing. To be fair, it wasn't very difficult to implement. I had already recorded the voice line, so I just made an array with them and an array of strings that had the exact same text, again with all matching array indexes, and I was able to make it work. The slightly harder part was making the million checks to see if you should actually play the thing and win, but in the end, it worked. Well, as long as the text box don't show up too fast, but that shouldn't be achievable in regular play. At this point, I decided to take a break from programming and work on some more art. Mostly just the menu things because Art's hard, I wanted something easy. Though this is the point where the game took a drastic shift. See, while working, I do one of two things. I either listen to the Oblivion soundtrack on repeat or chat with my friends. Sometimes it's both, but anyway, one friend of mine is an exceptionally talented videographer, having worked on hundreds, perhaps even thousands of commercial projects. I revealed to him that my game was designed to run in 720p, and his response was, "Are you stupid?" So I ended up changing it to 1080. That wasn't a huge problem because I made sure when making the textures to do everything relative, so it was a fairly straightforward process to just change the canvas size and rescale things. If you're wondering why I would want to make it 720p in the first place, I kinda had it in my head that this would be like one of those early 2000 Flash horror games, and so the smaller size just made me think that. But I mean, I think 1080 existed in the 2000s? I don't know. Anyway, back to coding. I decided to work on how you transition to the game, which Gary just fades in, and more importantly, how the game will actually work. By that I mean the game state. I used an enumerator to make a game state machine that would store the state as either the main menu, the pause menu, an animation playing state, or the gameplay loop. Technically, this could probably be simplified even more, perhaps all the way down to gameplay loop, or not gameplay loop, but I like it being more robust. This allows me to control what is able to happen and when simply by saying something like, if not gameplay loop, don't let the player click, or something along those lines. It's pretty easy to set up too, just a couple of if statements around what I want and a few functions that will simply change the state machine to the desired state. I also added an auto-click button which will toggle between the game playing itself or not. At this point I had added the boilerplate for a lot of things, but didn't actually flesh them out. For example, the audio and text pop-up aren't synced properly, they are using hard seconds instead of length. So, in an attempt to procrastinate more, I fixed that. Oh fine, I'll work on the hard stuff, time to do something a bit bigger. Animations. Well, one of them anyway, the smaller of the two animations, animating Gary's mouth. And when I say animating, all I mean is drawing various sized ovals that rotate out, giving a very unconvincing illusion of speech. The fun way I did this is that I literally just put the image on top of Gary. Like his original smile is still there, it's just hidden behind another texture. That wasn't so bad, maybe I should do the other animation now. Haha, nah, procrastination. But I actually can't do anything small. It's finally time to tackle one of the bigger parts of this project, and also a part that I had never done before. A save system. So, in theory, any save system you have ever seen is pretty straightforward. There are probably definitely multiple ways different engines handle it, but basically when you save key bits of information, they are stored somewhere on your system in an accessible place. You know, things like your health or your position, they're just stored as a value somewhere. Then, when you try to load in, instead of calling whatever the default value is, it reads the information and bam, that's a save load system. I'm positive there are better and more robust systems, but that's kind of the Cliff's Notes of it. In my case, I only need to store a few things, like the amount of money the player has. This can be achieved by making a save data class that will be used to store the information, and a save system that will be the actual executor of the save and load code. As I said, I had never done this before, and while I understood the theory behind it, I had no idea how to actually write this, so thanks ChatGPT, I much appreciate the assist. It's honestly pretty straightforward when I look at it though. We have a string that is the path to the save file, then when save data is fired, we pass the data we are going to save, parse it to a JSON file, and write that information to where the game should be saved. When we want to load, we first check if the file exists, we then make a string that is all of the saved data, parse it from JSON, which then gets mapped to the actual saved data, and then it just returns that information for us to use. So, all that's left, at least in this bare bones versions, is to figure out where we actually want to save and load the game. Loading is pretty easy, it's when the game starts. Saving, I decided, is whenever the player quits the game. I was going to have it go off whenever the click function is fired, which would be fine as well, but just to save, pun intended, a bit of memory being used, I figured this is better. That does mean though, if the player Alt F4s or the game crashes, their data is lost, an autosave feature would just be a timer, but this is a smaller project so I didn't bother to implement that. And with that, one of the larger final parts of the game is implemented. Well, at least partially. It working is a huge first step, and I'll just add the finer details later. I also decided to add the reset function now, and at first I tried to simply delete the file, which should work, as if the game doesn't locate a save, it'll make a new one with fresh data, but I went a little further and made loops that reset everything to 0. Originally, I wanted the game to restart like it reloading from a splash screen, but this menu is the whole game. It's the first scene, and reloading a scene in Unity doesn't actually reload a scene for some reason. One jerry-rigged workaround is to launch a second application and close the first, but that? I just didn't want to do that. So I just made restarting quit the game and called it a stylistic choice. I did run into a bug where the game didn't seem to delete the data properly, but it turns out the order of operations for what was happening was out of sync. Basically, it would save over the information after deleting it, but that information was still there, then it would quit, so on reload, you had some weird, amalgamation of stats where everything was reset except for your money, so at this point I figured it was time to handle the final big art piece, which is the different levels of Gary's insanity. That was pretty easy, kinda. I just made multiple sprites and then made it swap them out as you hit different levels of insanity. I did run into an issue where the correct sprite would load, but as soon as the player clicked it, it would revert to the base one. Want to guess what the issue was? That's right, it saved the information after the fact and was loading it from an improper save, but I ironed that out and it all worked out just fine. The last two big things to do before bug fixing and playtesting are hooking up the sound sliders to the sounds, and I guess adding the sounds for that matter, and adding Steam achievements. I have done both of these things before and they're both pretty straightforward. Well, I say that, but I actually did run into an issue where the sliders kinda didn't slide correctly. Like, you would click and it would just jump randomly to a different point. However, that doesn't happen with the stock standard Unity sliders, so it's definitely something with my texture, and that's not surprising, honestly, at all. As far as Steam achievements go, that really is straightforward. The reason why is because in my case, the achievements are just buying things which already exists in code, so I just need to go in and add a single line that will unlock the achievement at that place. And that's kinda it. Finally, the joy of hand washing is in its first truly playable state. Sorta. Like I said, there are plenty of bugs to iron out, but it always feels good to pull a project together, especially a multi-month long one like this. I didn't discuss everything I did here just to leave a tiny bit of mystery, but I hope you enjoyed the video and consider checking out the joy of hand washing on Steam. Available now.